We'll intervene whenever we decide it's in our national security interest to intervene. And if you don't like it, lump it.
The problem with America is not that we go around marauding around the world imposing ourselves. The problem with America in the last 10, 15 years, since the end of the Cold War, really in the last 60 years, is that we've been too slow to get involved.
I don't know how many Iraqi civilians were killed, but I can assure you that the number is the absolute minimal that it's possible in modern warfare.
Every nation in every region now has a decision to make. Either you are with us or you are with the terrorists.
You know, that land over there is yours. You'll go back to it one day because your fight will prevail and you'll have your homes and your mosques back again because your cause is right and God is on your side.
Welcome to the Darkened Hour.
Welcome to another episode of the Darkened Hour. I'm your host, Adam Fitzgerald. With me today is a very special guest, Erik Kleinsmith. Mr. Kleinsmith was part of the Chief Intelligence Branch of the U.S. Army's Land Information Warfare Activities Division, a former program manager at Lockheed Martin, and currently is Associate Vice President for Strategic Relationships within the Intelligence National Homeland Security and Cyber Communications for American Military University and American Public University. In 2005, he testified to the Senate Judiciary Committee about the data mining program run by the Defense Intelligence Agency, codenamed Able Danger. He is also the author of several intelligence security-related articles and the 2020 book entitled Intelligence Operations, Understanding Data, Tools, People, and Processes. Thank you for coming on, Erik.
Adam, thanks so much. I appreciate you getting my bio down because there's so many different pieces to it. You know, sometimes I forget pieces of it.
Yeah, no problem. I'll start off real simple. What is the Land Information Warfare Activities Division, and how did you become part of it?
The Land Information Warfare Activity, otherwise known as LIWA, was an organization or a unit created within the Army in 1995, and it was to tackle the recognition that warfare in the information sphere was just as important as lethal fires. So for combat operations, and so they rolled in a lot of different aspects under the responsibility of LIWA, and it included deception, psychological operations, computer network defense, computer network operations, operational security. So keeping the things that your unit is doing a secret, or whatever your organization is, and all those pieces required a new line of thinking, a new set of skills for both the operators and analysts to work. And so I initially came there from a tour with the Army in Germany, where I was a counterintelligence company commander, and I had about 150 agents, interrogators, and linguists in the Balkans, and the first peace implementation force into Bosnia in 1996, and I came to I went from there to LIWA, initially in a program which is really just, the only thing I can talk about is it was a black program, the part of what LIWA did. So I worked that for my first year, and then around the beginning of the second year, I had a colleague that said, they're missing the chief of their intelligence branch. And oh, by the way, the intelligence branch is a mess right now because there was an internal sexual harassment scandal going on within the branch. There was interesting fighting between the different types of folks that were in there, the warrant officers, the NCOs, the civilians, and then the soldiers were caught in the middle. And so I requested by the commander to take over it and clean it up and fix it. And in the middle of doing all of that was when our LIWA was just getting involved with the data mining aspect. And so they were building underneath in the second level floor basement of the Intelligence and Security Headquarters on Fort Belvoir, Virginia. They were clearing out all the office spaces, and they were building what was called, and what is still called, the Information Dominance Center. And they brought in a guy from Disney, a guy named Brand Farron, or who worked for Disney, who designed the Starship Enterprise for the next generation. And he built this center down there. They removed like 109 cubicles and office spaces and created this center with a huge screen. If the commander wanted to sit in his center console seat, which was a Recaro sports car seat, and we had different pods and nodules around there, but that was the flash of it. But behind it was a massive effort to build in the Department of Defense's really first successful operation at doing data mining. And so that's the role that I was in that job when we picked up the Able Danger piece was trying to tackle what we call the bleeding edge technology of how to use these data mining tools in operations, when before that there was really nothing written about how to do that.
How did LIWA become part of the Defense Intelligence Agency's covert Operation Able Danger, and what did it do for them?
We were approached, and this was off of a previous mission. And again, when we got in there with the tools, it took us several months just to figure it out. We were rewriting the book on how to do analysis using data mining tools. And what we quickly understood, though, is that our intelligence community and anyone doing intelligence operations and any kind of analysis we spent decades investing in collection systems. So the Department of Defense went nuts with the U-2 spy plane, in history, and then the SR-71, and then satellites, and then all these different technical collection measures. But they were really there was really nothing to handle all the data that was now increasingly come in. So it was overwhelming. So we started using these tools, and we were using them on test cases at first to show the capability of what our analysts could do. And one of the first things that we picked up was doing a sensing session, or doing just an analytical piece on how our technology was being stolen by the People's Republic of China. And we did it really we used a sample technology. I think we flipped a coin on which one we were going to use, because that wasn't the important piece. It was mapping out and showing the results of the tools. Well, that became such a successful analytical project using data mining tools that it reached Capitol Hill. And we ended up helping then Congressman Kurt Weldon on a mission. He was going into Serbia. He didn't understand, he was looking for information about one of the Serbians that he was negotiating with. He had asked several agencies for help, and they really didn't have much other than a page and a half of material. One of our folks who had links with Congress was able to get to him. He asked one of our lead scientists who came to our folks and just said, look, can you run something on this guy? So we ran, I think it took us a day and a half, and we came up with 18 pages worth of stuff on this guy that we were pulling off of both classified and just open source, i.e. the internet, on him. And he was so impressed that he asked us to do this technology piece for the technology protection mission, and how we were having classified technology stolen by our adversaries. That really put us on the map, and also in the crosshairs of many other intel agencies who did not have the tools yet, but saw that this group of 24 analysts were running circles around some of the larger agencies with the responsiveness and the focus we could give to a warfighter, somebody who needed, somebody who was needed to make decisions off of that. And that's when the chief scientist that I had a relationship with in the center with was Dr. Eileen Pricer. She had met up with Tony Schaefer and a guy from Special Operations Command, Commander Scott Philpott, and asked, look, these guys from Special Operations Command are going around DC. They're kind of frustrated with the results they're getting, or the priority they're not getting for help in combating Al-Qaeda. Could you guys do something like that? And so we just gave them a demonstration of the data mining tools. This had to be, I think it was late December of 99. Yeah, late December. In December 99, we gave them a demonstration. We showed them some of the things that we could do. And they really didn't say a lot. They asked some pointed questions, but they left, and they called us back again and said, look, we think we want to get you guys involved with this. We need you to come down to, and this was Commander Philpott, and said, we need you to come down to a joint planning session at the Naval Surface Warfare Center in Dahlgren, Virginia, which is just off the Chesapeake River, Chesapeake Bay. And so that became a hot ticket item. Our leadership made the decision that we don't want Eileen Pricer going there because she's already created some enemies in the intel community. Send Erik and send another guy, a civilian who can moderate what Erik does. So they sent me with another GG or GS civilian who didn't have much to do with the data mining tools, but was just really running cover for me while I went to this session. And during that session, it was a collection of all the different agencies, that had showed up. It was just an interagency working group, and it was an attempt to do an initial planning session for how SOCOM could combat Al Qaeda. And again, this is 99. Early 2000s, so this is even before, well before 9/11. And what we found was that they were really unhappy with what folks from the CIA were bringing up. They were unhappy with folks from DIA, what they were talking about. Bin Laden's personal biographer, and I can't remember what agency he was from, he came out and at the beginning of the session said, "We think Bin Laden is about to die if he hasn't already has died from pancreatic cancer, and this is not that important to us." And about halfway through the day or at lunch, Commander Philpott came to me and just said, "Look, what do you think about this?" I said, "This is an exercise," and I told him this, my viewpoint coming from a tactical environment, this is an exercise in futility. Whoever is the loudest guy in the room is getting their viewpoint recorded, while anybody that has any problems, issues with it, there's really no back and forth discussion here. And he said, "So what can you do to add to this?" I said, "Let me call back to one of my chief analysts." And I called one of my warrant officers who is an expert with the tools. I said, "Let me have her run something and we'll get something back to you." And I gave her about 90 minutes. And I just said, "Look, I need you to map out where we get some hits from the data mining tools on Al Qaeda worldwide. Call you back in 90 minutes. Well, she emails me a file, put through some slides together very quickly, emailed to me on a classified server, and we were able to map out, again, within an hour and a half, major hotspots of where Al Qaeda was. And so we had 4 areas. We had, obviously, the Middle East. We had the Maghreb region of North Africa. We had the Far East, which was their linkage with Jamaat Islamiyah and Abu Sayyaf, other Islamic terrorist organizations operating out of Indonesia and the Philippines. And then we had some strange hits both in Europe and the Balkans, which we understood. And then finally, we had a lot of hits within the US. And that was our first indicator that there's something going on. These guys are as active as hell for a terrorist organization who's about to lose their leader, and the prevailing thought is that they're confined to the Middle East. And we were able to show that. We had, I remember specifically several other people from the session broke off and came into the separate conference room that I was using to brief back Commander Philpott on what we had found. One of them was a Navy commander who had outranked me as a major and was essentially very combative with the whole brief, and finally was just giving me all kinds of grief. And one of the things that he said was, "This is what you're showing me is nothing that my folks hadn't already been working on forever. We know all this information." And I said, "Yeah, but my folks did it in 90 minutes and we're already caught up." That's how data mining works. We're able to sift through information faster, spending more time doing analysis. And oh, by the way, the tools don't care about your biases and misperceptions or whatever you're working on. Your tools only care about what it gets back from you. So that's my 5-minute answer to a very short question of how we got involved. Because at that point, Commander Philpott just leaned over and goes, "Okay, you guys are in. We'll wrap up here. We'll just work with you guys exclusively."
I've always wanted to ask this. Who named it Able Danger, and why did they choose that specifically?
I don't know. I mean, I've had programs that I've worked on get classified at the time where we had to come up with a name for it. And this is just, who knows how they did that. But the first one part, and it was a black program I was working on, I said, "Look, I need a classification for this. This is a whole new area." So I had to go to the security manager at Intelligence and Security Command. And it was a older guy, about he had to be in his 60s, and he goes, all right, here's how we're going to do this. And he, no kidding, pulls out a dictionary, randomly flips through the pages and stops on one and puts his finger down and says, all right, this is your first word. And then he randomly does it again and goes, all right, this is your second word. That's the name of your program.
Right.
And I was like, well, that's just stupid as hell. I mean, just because it was just, sometimes you can get some pretty ridiculous combinations, but Able Danger was probably named just by somebody at SOCOM that said, these are two words that are pertinent and we can just keep it like that. And it's something that you just don't give away. You don't want to give away the operation.
Sure.
I mean, I was in a previous operation in Germany when I was an intelligence officer for a infantry battalion and armor brigade, and the infantry battalion I was in was going to go do a mission called Able Sentry in Macedonia, which was peacekeeping operations of manning outposts between Macedonia and Serbia. And one of the folks at our division headquarters said, okay, we're going to rename this operation, and just so that it's a code name and nobody knows what we're going to talk about, we're going to rename it Big Mac. And it was just kind of, it showed up on several slides. It's like, this is the most ridiculous name. We're going to Macedonia. You want to name this Big Mac? That's just,
right.
It was some staff captain, and they removed that after the first briefing and changed it to something else.
It seemed that 1996 was a key year for intelligence. The Central Intelligence Agency began the Bin Laden issue station. The Defense Intelligence Agency became Able Danger, and the NSA began to monitor a house in Yemen, which was the Al Qaeda communications hub.
Right.
Did any of these agencies turn to you for help in sharing intelligence, or were they refusing to acknowledge the program altogether because they didn't wish to share the data in the first place?
Well, part of it was the timing. So 96, LIWA was just getting started, and they did not have the data mining capabilities until, I would say, right about the time that I got there. And there was a chief scientist that had come in and immediately was able to lobby to get, I think it was, over $10 million, around $13 million worth of data mining tools to put in there. So then that was not until 98, 99. But as soon as we started doing what we were doing, our center, and again, because it looked like the bridge of the Enterprise, and it was just, so it was forward thinking, but also forward looking. And so you even had the automatic doors that would, swish when you approached Mike in Star Trek. But we started doing what in our terms were called dog and pony shows, where every VIP that wanted to see what the Army was doing, we were a short drive from DC. And so we were getting folks from the other agencies, folks from Congress, folks from other parts of DOD. And, I think I must have given between 80 and 200 dog and pony show briefings on the intelligence capabilities of the center. That got us a lot of attention, but also it got a lot of, the target was kind of on our back, because here was a small cell of 24 analysts working for LIWA, which was not an intelligence organization, was an operational organization, in the basement of Intelligence and Security Headquarters, which is intelligence, that and part of the Army's intelligence structure. So it was a really strange relationship, but that gave us really open license to support whoever we needed. And so we started supporting, I remember specifically supporting a lot of combatant commands like Pacific Command or European Command, because they were just not happy with the way that they were asking for support from national level agencies and just not getting the priority or not getting the response. It was that, but we could provide that level of detail and get that to them much quicker by almost circumventing a very archaic military structure of passing up requirements and things like that. So we had customers that were coming to us left and right, but we were getting other intelligence agencies who were very unhappy with the way that we were, running fast and loose with data and with analysis. And so, one of the biggest complaints was like, well, your stuff hasn't been vetted. Your analysis hadn't been vetted. We need to take that through a system and another person has to look at it, almost like in academia where a paper had to be peer reviewed before it could be put out. We were running so fast with the data, we could put back a product within 12 to 24 hours that was fairly substantial And that's really all. Our customer didn't care whether it was vetted or not. They just wanted to see what it was. That's the same way it is in a tactical environment. When, my commander in an infantry battalion was we'd spend 10 minutes doing an entire battle drill, or he'd ask for an assessment on the fly. That's the kind of mentality that I had brought in, and I re-wickered our intelligence branch to be that responsive. So it was more than just data mining. It was just the environment that our intelligence branch was in. We were getting calls left and right from just off the wall. Hey, we want you to take a look at the current intifada going on between the Palestinians and the Israelis. We specifically got a request from the Army Chief of Staff, that the head of the U.S. Army wants to know within 24 hours what's the effect of these propaganda efforts and the propaganda war taking place between the Palestinians and the Israelis. We were the only ones that could turn around a product that fast with, multimedia and examples and things like that.
Right. Now that's interesting because I asked Schaefer this in a previous interview about him having a closed door meeting with the CIA's Alex station. And right off the bat, you could tell that there was this level of indifference toward each agency.
Yeah.
Was that specifically with the CIA, or did you have that feeling with other intelligence agencies as well when this was transpiring?
I would say it was almost everyone that we ran into, and partly is because, again, we were not part of a 3-letter intel agencies. Right. We were a very small refined operation that could focus specifically on a single customer, our boss, and the customers of information warfare. And that's what made it, as example of after the USS Cole was bombed, and this was, after all we were shut down for the Able Danger piece. We were allowed to start back up, but it was too late before the Cole was bombed. Well, SOCOM didn't come back to us. It was U.S. Central Command, and the J2 of Central Command was a guy named Brigadier General Keith Alexander. And they came up with their analysts, and they wanted to work with us. And we had a working group where we brought in all the different agencies had representation, CIA, NSA, DIA, they all came in, and I hosted this meeting within our center in this, massive triangular conference room that overlooked the Information Dominance Center, big glass, kind of like a glass fishbowl within the center. Right. And as we went around the room, everybody introduced themselves where they came from, and we had one individual come up to us that came down from NSA, and he basically started out by saying, I'm from NSA. Here's all the things I cannot do for you, and his introduction to himself was all the things that he couldn't or wouldn't do, and I just kind of blew him off, and I asked to speak with him at a break. And I just had him in the room alone with my commander who ran cover for me. And I just asked this guy, I was like, look, we need this kind of information for this operation. He goes, well, I can't give you that. I can only give you, when I get that kind of information in, I can't give it to you raw because I have to sift through that and vet that information to see that it's any good. I was like, okay, well, then give me that. Well, no, I can't give you that either because then I got to go through and call out the important pieces that I'm going to write a report on. It's like, oh, okay, give me that. Well, no, I can't give you that because I still then have to do analysis on those and then build a report that then goes up. And I just said, you know what? All right, you're fired. I said, go back to NSA, tell them that NSA cannot help us on the USS Cole bombing aftermath analysis. Tell them that NSA is no longer a player in this. And he left for the day. He came back the very next day with all kinds of apologies. And, he said, well, we're changing our stance. What can we do to help you? And I think that's just an example of all the resistance that we saw, partly because folks that didn't understand data mining, partly because they didn't understand or didn't like our organization, the fact that we could use data mining and go 10 times as fast as they could, but also, and then partly just because their own culture was based around the information is power, or if I have information, I have that power. If I give that to you freely, I'm giving you my power. I really can't afford to do that. We in our agency need to receive credit for everything that we do. And so it's those three things combined that really put a target on our backs to really kind of kept us from getting cooperation across several operations.
Who from LIWA was involved with the Able Danger program, and was the data mining effective in returning actionable intelligence?
Yes, we kept our support to Able Danger within an extremely small group.
Right.
As I had a branch of 24 analysts, I only tasked 4 of us to work it, and I included myself in that. So, because we had other missions that were concurrently going on all the time. We had requests for information from, again, from all over DOD. So we were continually work those. So I peeled off 1 warrant officer, 1 civilian, and myself from my branch, and then our senior scientist, Dr. Eileen Price. It was 4 of us that worked that almost, in an ad hoc cell that I had assembled to provide that support, and that was it. So just between the 4 of us, we're working that, and again, I had to manage the branch at the same time. So it was, doing all my daily routines, doing all my, all the other things that I was responsible for. But then every other piece was working on that, doing analysis, doing quality control checks on the analysis that the other folks were working on.
Now, was the data mining effective in returning actionable intelligence?
Yes, absolutely. And this is where it's having a little bit of an understanding of what type of analysis we were doing. Normally, when you get a request in, it's something that's very specific. I need to know, I need to know about this person and his involvement in this operation, or I need to know about the electrical infrastructure of this part of this country, or that kind of thing. What we received from SOCOM wasn't even really anything. It was so general. It was essentially find Al Qaeda worldwide, go. That was it. And so it was as fast as our tools could do, but it was really a way to conduct what the military then called IPB, or intelligence preparation of the battlefield, or intelligence preparation of the battle space. And they've renamed it several things since then. But it's really just to see what we had, just to lay out and create a map. And that's what we started doing, was an analytical process called threat mapping, where you mapped out the locations and dispositions and relationships of all the key players, key accounts, key locations, safe houses, and just kind of lay those out on both a physical and an information map that says, this is our map of this organization. Here's who talks to who, here's the relationships with outside elements. And that's really what you have to do that before you can then, answer more specific questions about who is this guy and where does he live, or something like that. And so that's as far as we got when we started doing the data mining, as we started mapping out, again, those 4 to 5 key locations or concentrations of the organization around the world. We started fleshing those out as much as we could. And our initial charts that we were creating were just link charts of people, places, and things that we knew were important, that we started sending back to SOCOM. And I know there's a big, during the Able Danger hearings years later, there was a huge question of, like, what about the chart? What about the chart that had Mohammed Atta in the New Jersey cell? Where is that chart, or who can verify that he was on there? And my first time I heard that question pop up, and I was just like, which chart? It's not one chart. We had 24 charts that we had created. Right. We had several different types of products that we had put together, and we pulled in a contractor named J.D. Smith, who then worked for a very small company named Orion. I think it was Orion Technologies, or Orion something or other.
It was Orion Scientific, I believe.
Yeah, Orion Scientific. And so, and I had already worked with him on some pieces for the Balkans, support to the Balkans. But again, so they were even creating charts and sending them to us. And so it was, we had so many pieces, but all of it was really just to lay out to SOCOM at first, this is kind of where we have the organization today. This is the, you know, the locations and the people and the leadership and the targets they're going after, and it became the basis for really of an analytical technique that I put in my book on threat profiling. Instead of like the FBI profiles a serial murderer, as I was able to develop what we had done there and into profiling an entire group. And here's how to look at the group's organization, its leadership, its vulnerabilities, its strengths, its weaknesses, its social demographics. What's the type of people they recruit? How do they recruit? You know, anything you need to know about an organization. That's kind of what we were trying to build. And it was right during that first process, so we could give, you know, something back to SOCOM and then have them come back to us like, all right, we're interested in this area here. Or look, we want to interdict this safe house or whatever. We never got to that point because that's right where we were when we were then shut down and given the orders to cease and desist work on this from DOD lawyers.
In January of 2000, Scott Philpott was part of the team, would meet with General Shoemaker and General Shelton.
Yes.
And he would brief them on LIWA's capabilities in regards to Able Danger and their data mining. After the meeting, LIWA would become the full intelligence analytical partner.
Right.
And the Joint Chiefs of Staff were highly impressed with your data mining techniques.
Right.
It seemed that the Defense Intelligence Agency were not even aware of the data mining techniques you employed.
Well, it was a resistance, you know, not having, you know, exposure to it. And again, these are folks, I mean, there was one analyst that came in that was, no kidding, part of Operation Desert One, rescuing the American hostages in Iran in 1980, you know, and you know, that's how long this guy had been around. And, you know, so I don't want to say he's long in the tooth, but, you know, there were several of these, especially the older folks were dead set on their way, which most of the folks we were working with were by that time were senior levels. I was one of the youngest people involved with a lot of these meetings at 33. And so part of it, example, is they just were downgrading or just simply dismissing the tools themselves. And so we finally just said, look, here's a shot of a tool that we were using. I think it was called Themescape, which was then developed by Cartia Labs. And it would take about, I think we had like 4,000 documents that were laid out like a geographic look of a landscape. And so it no kidding, looked like an island with peaks and valleys based upon different points of data how they align with each other in whatever all the documents that you pulled up. And the first thing this one of these guys said was just, well, this isn't showing me what I want to see. And we said, yeah, yes, that's the whole problem. These tools are not going to show you what you want to see. They're going to tell you what the data is telling us. And the data is telling us, you know, exactly what we asked for, which was, you know, find Al-Qaeda worldwide. You know, just let's start creating this map. And that's part of the problem, was just not understanding the tools, and then therefore not wanting, you know, then all of a sudden it becomes more of a survivability and a protectionist issue. It's like, last thing we want is for these punks in LIWA to upstage the entire DIA, you know, counterterrorism effort or CIA's counterterrorist effort. These guys, we need to get rid of these guys. And so as soon as somebody found that there was a problem with the data mining tools and that they would, you know, collect so much information, we had 2.5 terabytes in our first polls. They were collecting so much information, it is almost 100% guarantee that they are pulling in information about US persons and therefore are potentially in violation of you know, the intelligence regulations that we are not authorized to collect information about US persons. Right. It's 100% guarantee that they just did that through the data mining tools.
Right, that was going to be my next question, actually. I'm glad it was a good lead up. In May of 2000, you were ordered by Tony Gentry of the General Counsel of the Army Intelligence and Security Command to destroy the 2.5 terabytes of data.
Yeah, yes.
Because of that, because it was pertaining to U.S. persons and could not be held longer for 90 days. And that was concerning Mohammed Atta, Marwan al-Sheikh, Ziad Jarrah, members of the Hamburg cell, in which later on, under oath, William Dugan, the assistant to Defense Secretary of Intelligence Oversight, said that they were not considered U.S. persons. Now, my question is, did you at all think about storing the data secretly elsewhere? And if you did, what kind of repercussions would you have faced? And also, why did Dugan's response contradict what you were told regarding Atta and others, as opposed to what Duncan told the committee?
It technically he was correct, but that's not why we had to delete the data.
Right.
It's not because of Mohammed Atta and the other 9/11 hijackers were in there. I mean, nobody knew at the time that they were going to do what they were going to do. It's the fact that when we harvested that much information, it was all the other data that had all the other U.S. persons that were in there. And so one example is we did a poll, and that brought us to that brought us to an article about Stanford University. Well, it mentions Condoleezza Rice in the article that said that she was, I think, a fellow or on the board of Stanford for a while, or had some sort of relationship. Well, she was named in the article. We found this was the one I always remember because it was kind of hilarious. But we found a Moroccan car dealership that was being used as a front organization to funnel money into the Al-Qaeda. So as part of their logistics element. And we, no kidding, had briefed, we had folks from the FBI had come up to take a look at our briefing and show them what we had. And they stopped and said, so wait a minute, where'd you get that information? And we pulled up and said, well, we have we have several reports that had verified this, but the tip-off was a website that was run by this Michigan militia conspiracy theorist dude, that on the same web page that we showed them, it had information about this car dealership, but then it also said that the KGB and the FBI were in collusion to arm northern Michigan by moving weapons and creating weapons caches in northern Michigan and the Upper Peninsula for the takeover and creation of a new state up there. And then had another conspiracy that Chelsea Clinton's real father was Webster Hubble. And so it had all this stuff that had nothing to do with it, but that one piece on that page, for whatever reason, this nut was absolutely right because we could back it up with other data from different sources. But because that was our tip-off, the folks at the Bureau looked at us like, these guys are nuts. They're relying upon conspiracy kooks for their tipping and queuing of the analysis that we're doing. And that was part of the problem we were running into. Is like, look, the tool doesn't care what a nut this guy was. All the tool cares was that this was a hit. And then that it was able to back it up by finding linkages to other reports that said the same thing. That's the mentality, again, what we were fighting. I didn't even answer your question, but that's
right. No, when you were ordered to destroy data, did you think about secretly storing the data now? And if you did, what kind of ramifications would you be looking at?
Oh yeah, I mean, we got the first cue. It was a couple of weeks before the 90-day market, and I guess, and just for clarity, is we operate off of some very strict rules, and it starts with Executive Order 12333, and then that leads into, there was a DoD regulation, and then but the Army regulation then was a 381-10, and then the 381-10 had 15 basic rules or procedures on how you could collect information about U.S. persons under which circumstances, and then how long you could keep it. And we had, again, 90 days from collection. And that was, again, one of the conflicting points was, is it considered collection if you did it as a human being, you collected information. Yeah, that's, you collected information about a U.S. person. But when a tool did it, just based upon a query, that was one of the things the lawyers were trying to wrestle with. Is that considered a directed effort, or was it just collected incidentally? And so, they erred on the side of caution, just said that was a directed effort. So you have 90 days to keep this information, and then you're going to have to delete it. And so we got warned beforehand. I sat in my office with the warrant officer I had on there, and we both talked about, and she was like, what if we just put all this stuff on a hard drive and just kind of kept it in a safe someplace? So once we got running again, we wouldn't have to delete it. I said, if we do that, we're knowingly violating the law, and it's not just a little law. This is a go to jail law type thing. And so, the day that it occurred, Captain Gentry came down from the INSCOM legal office. I mean, he was a friend of mine, so it was not a hostile interchange between us, but he just said, look, I'm joking with you now, but you got to delete this today, you're going to jail. And so we had to make the effort. So I deleted everything that was online, and the warrant officer I was working with, she deleted everything that was in our backups. And so, I mean, that was about the, yeah, that was a horrible day, but it wasn't as horrible as realizing that after 9/11, or right when 9/11 hit, that evening we were on the phone with each other, knowing, because we knew something was coming. We knew that there was an operation on its way. We couldn't figure it out, but as soon as 9/11 hit, we were all on the phone with each other and said we had them. We had these guys. And that was the toughest part.
And just to give some clarity, I was going to ask, before Able Danger, and because of LIWA, managed to collect an enormous amount of open source data regarding 2 or 3 cells that were operating inside the United States.
Yes.
One that was headed by Omar Abdel Rahman, who was convicted for the landmarks plot. Yep. And of course, Mohammed Atta. Right. And also 20 suspects, and some of them were involved with the 9/11 attacks.
Right.
Just to give you some clarity about what kind of information Able Danger was able to put. So your Able Danger was considered relatively a success here.
It was, up until the point of when we were stopped.
Right.
We had a great focus, and this is why I titled my book Understanding Data, Tools, People, and Processes, because that's, after 9/11, all kinds of intelligence organizations were popping up all over within the US, and a lot of other organizations had figured out, it's like, why should I be 57th in line to get a DIA analyst's read on something when I can go hire my own, and I can just put some data and tools in a room and have my own dedicated intel structure. So that's what's changing, and it's still changing Intel today on how it's run. So the problem is that you just can't put intelligence data and a bunch of tools in a room and say, now I have a capability. You have to have a very well thought out and planned and perfect combination of data, tools, people, and processes. If just one of those aspects is broken, your intelligence operation is worthless or dysfunctional. And that's what we had at the time, is we had the data, we had the tools, but more importantly than anything else is we had some extremely bright people that were working on this, not from the engineering side, but from the, they were smart in their own right, but we had, I had some incredibly smart analysts, and we were able to figure out and develop the processes that we would use that were sound. And only because of that reason were we successful in doing, uncovering all these different elements without getting bogged down in the process itself.
Right. Now, Colonel Robert Worthington of the U.S. Air Force, who was the director of Able Danger between June of 2000 and January of 2001, ordered that the unit was not permitted to share any data with FBI officials due to fear of potential blowback, that the U.S. Special Operations Command was concerned about another Waco incident. Was this concern shared amongst your team at LIWA and Able Danger?
Yes, but that was not as important to us in Virginia as the problem we were run into is being just shut down in our entirety. The sharing is like, all right, that's a SOCOM problem. We'll let them work that out. We got to the point where they brought our team into the room, had us re-sign our documentation on intelligence oversight that we understood the rules. And then at one point, as we were negotiating with, and the commander of LIWA at the time was Colonel Jim Gibbons, where he told him and myself to our face that we're going to have a lawyer sit down next to you and your analysts. So every time that they're working on something, if they're getting ready to click on a new node, essentially they wanted to make sure that the lawyer had approved that you could do that. And it got to the point where, and Gibbons just threw his hands up in frustration, just said, we have a Formula One race car and you're asking us to go around the track at 20 miles an hour. We may as well get out and walk. That's how dumb there's some of the interim solutions they came up with were in order to do that. What's funny is after the Cole bombing, they just threw all those to the wind. And I know after 9/11, again, they went nuts. I mean, there's a great book by Shane Harris called The Watchers that I'm featured in that talks about that. about what, how 9/11 changed the attitudes on how protective are we going to be over this U.S. person's information when, all of a sudden we are having people die up into the thousands because we screwed this one up.
Right. Now, in a key period around this time, and according to Schaefer, was the retirement of General Peter Shoemaker in October of 2000.
Right.
And his replacement was General Charles Holland. And he says that that was a major reason for the shutdown of the data mining effort. And he says in the book Operation Dark Heart, quote, that General Holland, in my judgment, did not understand the concept. And he ordered the effort to terminate its activities in Garland, Texas, and for the personnel to return to Tampa. The location of SOCOM headquarters, end quote. And according to Schaefer, the teeth and operational focus are now removed, and that effectively ended Able Danger. Is that true?
Yeah. Yes. And that's the thing is we had seen that every time I gave a presentation or one of these dog and pony shows, we would classify our visitors as the get it's and don't get it's. And the get it's, you could just tell because they saw the potential, they saw what could be done. And you could actually see them nodding their heads along as they were looking at it, or asking very pointed questions like, that means I could do this and I could do this, this, and this. And the don't get it's were the folks that, would physically, you could tell they'd cross their arms, they'd stare blankly, or they'd ask very accusatory questions about, well, you don't know what you're doing here, or that. And to have somebody come in that was a don't get it was not a surprise. Now, SOCOM became so frustrated waiting for LIWA to get our legal hurdles taken down that they decided to try to recreate the operation in Garland, Texas, at I think it was a Raytheon facility. And again, they just threw data and tools into a room, but they didn't have the analytical, the analysts or the right people and the processes to make it work. So it was probably better that Holland did that because he was shutting down an operation that wasn't really working as effective as what we could do.
And yet, just to reiterate more, you guys saw the expansive nature of these terrorist cells, whereas, and you were reporting this back to your superiors, and it just seemed like that there wasn't a click there, or otherwise they wouldn't have shut it down. Would that have been the case? Or was it basically because of the legal ramifications?
It was the legal stuff. I mean, that's all it was. I mean, that's one of the problems we ran into with this Chinese technology, the Chinese technology theft mission that we had done before Able Danger is there was a rumor had floated up on Capitol Hill that we were being ordered to delete all the data for that as well. And so we were subpoenaed by, and I think it was the House, one of the committees, the House either House Judiciary Committee or I can't remember who did it, but we received a subpoena from Congress to provide all of the data. So we spent the entire week, rest of the week and weekend making photocopies of all the data that we use. And it turned out into 40 to 50,000 pages of printed material. We had to print these databases out, package them all up, and then send different copies to Congress and to everywhere else. And it was the biggest worthless drill in our lives of why why would we have to do that? Well, it was a fear that the data was going to be lost. And so that's going into, by the time we went into the Able Danger piece, we were already notorious for some of the waves that we were causing because we could see things that they could not, that the rest of the DoD couldn't see. Right. And again, we did a similar technology protection mission was running concurrent to Able Danger, and it was to help the Army understand how technology was being stolen from the Army as a counterintelligence effort. And I provided those results directly up to the Pentagon and went up there and briefed it. And the senior civilian that I briefed, he ended the meeting and kind of walked out, and he just said, "I got to hire 24 counter intel guys to cover all these areas you just revealed to me that we don't look at." And it was because I was able to show him in a quick map, and this one only took us a few days, of here's how your technology is being stolen. It's being stolen before it's classified. So you have infiltration of foreign nationals within our universities that are stealing the technologies as it's being researched. And then you've got partnerships with U.S. companies that are doing research on classified technology, with partnerships with other foreign companies who are then turning and partnering with the Chinese or our adversaries. And so they're stealing it that way as well. And the Army was again, it was shocked by looking at this, saying, we don't even look at those areas. Thanks to the culture created after the Vietnam War, there's no reason to go for U.S. intelligence to go on a college campus. That's just criminal. Well, guess what? You're doing the classified research, and that's where it's being stolen before you classify it. And that, again, that caused waves. So that operation was shut down and concurrently to Able Danger, because we were doing the same things for a different mission, totally different mission. And those, both of them were shut down at the same time. We couldn't work on either of them.
When did Able Danger officially end, and what happened to LIWA afterwards?
Well, LIWA's still there running as an organization. It's been renamed as the 1st Information Operations Battalion, and same logo and everything else. They've changed their mission focus. They've obviously, over the last 20 years, there's 100 things of reorganization pieces that have changed on it. But Able Danger effectively ended for us when the Cole bombing occurred and we started supporting CENTCOM instead of SOCOM. SOCOM had said, well, we're going to Texas, we don't need you guys anymore. The Cole bombing occurred, and then CENTCOM came up. So it's, same base from Florida, but we're providing support to a different group.
After the September 11th attacks, Dr. Eileen Presser held a meeting with Anthony Schaefer and showed him a chart with Mohammed Atta. Even with all the detractors and critics, the Able Danger program was a relative success, albeit the data was never shared with anybody outside the program. If you never were ordered by U.S. Army lawyers to destroy the data, do you believe it could have prevented some or all of the attacks?
Yeah,
September 11th?
I mean, and I testified before the Senate Judiciary Committee. That's like, it's just, you don't know, but I know it would have, I know it would have been, the data that we had worked on by itself would have been a help. But if we had been allowed to continue to work it and flesh out those areas and vet those pieces, yes, absolutely, we would have had a significant influence on events up until that point.
After Schaefer was privately interviewed by 9/11 Commission Director Philip Zelikow regarding the Able Danger program, were you or anyone else questioned by the 9/11 Commission?
No.
Joint House inquiry?
No, never even approached. And we were actually between a couple of us, we were talking about that. God, I wonder when they're going to come down and want to talk to us about that.
Well, why do you think that was, by the way?
I don't know. I don't know if it was because of the troubles that Schaefer was already having with on a personal level at the DIA already. So therefore, anything he said was discounted. Most of us just went back to doing whatever jobs we were doing, after the military, and it's just. It wasn't up for us. Again, it was, and we were providing support to SOCOM as a customer. So a lot of us were hesitant to talk about that just because of how sensitive that mission was. It wasn't until after Tony Schaefer came forward that I came into work, and at that point I was still working for INSCOM as a contractor, and I was running a training program for them to teach all their analysts how to use data mining tools. And that program is actually still running. But I walked into work, and there were several of my colleagues, there were several retired lieutenant colonels that were in the office, and they were just like, "Hey, did you hear the news?" I said, "No, what's up?" I said, "There's a Tony Schaefer. This guy came out, and he's in the news about saying that these guys there's an operation that was run right out of INSCOM headquarters that had found Mohammed Atta, a 9/11 hijacker." And I just said, it was like, "Yeah, you know who the military lead was on that?" He goes, "Who?" I said, "Me." And that afternoon, I was called by a producer from 60 Minutes. I was called by our lawyer, or the lawyer that was representing Tony at the time, Mark Zaid. And shortly thereafter, I said, time for me to call my congressman and let him know that look, you got somebody who was involved. I'm probably going to get dragged up there to testify.
Right. Now, after it was decided that the 9/11 Commission would not use the information provided by Schaefer, on top of this, the DIA's Inspector General Mike Kingsley had, quote unquote, significant allegations against Schaefer, which required his top secret SCI to be suspended.
Right.
What was your reaction to this? And were you or anyone else from the Able Danger program worried about potential blowback from the Defense Department?
No, the only problem I had was a senior civilian within Intelligence Security Command headquarters who had something against me for the work I was doing at the time, not during Able Danger. And so she had asked to have my clearance revoked and thrown out of the building because using Able Danger as a way to keep me out from being a problem for them for my current job as a trainer and instructor. I then found out I had several other civilians that were working in INSCOM headquarters that said they would quit if I got thrown out. And the legal counsel brought me up into his office, said, I never knew how many, you'll never know how many good friends you have in this building, because several of them threatened to walk if that happened. And I had no idea any of that occurred. I had no idea any of that was going on against Tony Schaefer as well until much later.
Right. On September 21st of 2005, the Senate Judiciary Committee headed by Chairman All Inspector heard from yourself and members of the Able Danger team, and you testified at Schaefer's behalf, where he could not because of his suspension. What was the nature of your testimony?
But part of it was was telling the story of that we did exist. This is what we did do. This is why we were stopped, and this is the reason why I was the one that had to delete the data. That was one of the most horrible things to hear from someone, was when I walked into their room to testify, and it was just packed wall to wall standing room only. It was in a very large room. And I leaned over to the staffer that I'd been working with, and I know it was our inspector's chief of staff, and I just asked him, of one of his staffers, and I said, "Gosh, who are all these people?" And he goes, "Well, about a third of them are the media, about a third of them are other staffers who have, other senators and congressmen who have sent their staffers over to listen, and the remaining third are the families of the victims of 9/11." And that's when it kind of hits, like, oh, great, I get to go explain how I had the ability to possibly prevent 9/11, and yet I'm the one who deleted all the data. That's fantastic.
Right. That certainly couldn't have been comfortable right off the bat. I tell you.
No, what made it worse is somebody had put the company I was working for at the time, Lockheed Martin, underneath my signature name for the testimony, which in large defense contractor terms is you never represent a company without their say. So I didn't even know that occurred, because even though I testified, all this happened before I came to Lockheed. It has nothing to do with Lockheed. I just happen to work for them now. That's not how it came out on the teleprompter on C-SPAN or wherever it was being covered. Right. And I walked out and I immediately called my boss just to tell him I was on my way back. He goes, "Yeah, I forgot to tell you, you got fired when you started testifying, but as I talked to them during your testimony, they gave you your job back by the time you were done." So all that was going on while I was testifying.
What a roller coaster.
Right. Jeez. So it was, it was just one of those things that it's just when you get to some very chaotic times, the amount of times I had to testify. In fact, I had to do a 4-hour closed door testimony before the members of the Senate, and it was in the room directly behind the hearing room where John Roberts was having his testimony for being Chief Justice of the Supreme Court at the exact same time.
Wow. So
while that's going on, I could actually hear that going on in the room next to us while I was giving this highly classified testimony on camera for this operation.
Right. Tell us, after all this was said and done, what do you do now? I mean, what have you been working on? Has it anything to do with intelligence itself, or what? Tell us what you're doing at the current moment.
Well, after I left the Army, again, I went to a very small company called Cytec that was later bought by Lockheed, and I started a training. I just turned right around and started a training program for the Army. And they gave me like enough money to hire 7 instructors. You know, here's a small amount of money. And so for the first couple of years after leaving the Army, it was that. But I grew that program into 150 instructors, and it turned into a $30 million a year training program for the entire for the entire Army. So for every soldier that, as soon as they were out of the schoolhouse and doing individual training at their unit, it was usually one of my folks that was doing that. But that was at the point where I reached burnout stage. So as I had gone to American Military University to get my master's while I was on active duty, it was a simple adjustment and I was already working for them on an industry advisory council. I was able to come on board with them and work outreach and projects for them. So it's what I do primarily now is work for our school to do partnerships with other agencies, with other organizations, whether it's law enforcement. And it's really, more of a organization to organization agreements on there's a lot of places where there's a lot of folks doing great stuff for training folks, whether it's, and our school will evaluate those courses for academic credit, or will provide incentives for organizations that have a lot of students that come to us. I mean, our school has one of the largest intelligence studies programs in the world for students. I think the largest brick and mortar university in the U.S. and it's a school I'm familiar with up in Ohio called Mercyhurst College. They have roughly 300 students. Our school has upwards close to 4,000 intelligence studies students alone, whether it's bachelor's, master's, or at the doctoral degree. So there's no end of different projects and programs that I'm working on for that. One piece that I've gotten into the last couple of years has been on cold cases. And because of my involvement in Able Danger, I was introduced to and started working with a friend of mine who's now I consider a fairly close friend out of Los Angeles named Tom Colbert. And he brought me onto a cold case he was working on in 2011 to identify the real identity of the hijacker, D.B. Cooper. And so we've been working that for an incredible length of time. And in the process of which there was one History Channel documentary that came out on that, and we're now currently working on a 5-part documentary for Netflix about D.B. Cooper and who this guy really was and what his life is. And then in the process of working that, 3 more cases that, again, I can't talk about which ones they are, but they're considered the holy grails of cold cases. We started working those as well, and we think we've solved 2 of the 3 to the point where we'll be pretty confident if we're going to go do some investigation, some physical digging someplace to see if we can find evidence that supports our hypothesis.
Well, Erik, I thank you very much for the interview today. Thank you very much. I've been wanting to get in contact with you for a while.
Sure.
And I appreciate your time in answering the questions today. Thank you very much for coming on.
I know I talk long and I talk fast, but if there's any questions that come up, you think same thing with your listeners. I mean, I'm on LinkedIn. I tell everybody that I give presentations, send me a LinkedIn invite if you got any specific questions. I'm happy to answer them. That's part of my job, so it's no big deal.
Thank you for coming on, Erik.
Sure.
And we'll